week we are going to proclaim Holocaust Remembrance Day here in the city of San Jose. January 27th, this Friday, marks the International Memorial Day for survivors and victims of the Holocaust. It took the lives of 6 million Jews, making up 2/3 of the population of European Jews, 1.4 million Polish people, almost 300,000 Romani people, members of the LGBT community, and political dissidents. Holocaust Remembrance Day commemorates the liberation of Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, and is marked in many ways across the world, including an event called March of the Living, which is an annual event where students walk from Auschwitz to Birkenau. During the Holocaust, millions were sent through these death camps, where they endured forced labor, slavery, medical experimentation, torture, starvation, and the gas chambers. Unfortunately, the Holocaust cannot be viewed in isolation. There have been other instances throughout the history of Jewish people being targeted, such as the pogroms under the Russian Empire, the Spanish Inquisition, and even in our country, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where the shooting a few years ago. The depravity of the Nazis is hard to fathom. That's why it's important to continue to read and learn about what was happening in Europe during the 30s and 40s. Last year I reread Night by Eli Wetzel and read the graphic novel Mouse, and I'm still shocked every time I read more about what people went through during that time. And this wasn't ancient history. This was just 80 years ago. And now more than ever, it's important to keep these stories alive, especially as we once again see a rise of anti-Semitism in our community. When we say never again, it means to never allow genocide in any form. We commit ourselves to remembering victims in Rwanda, Armenia, Ukraine, Bosnia, and anywhere genocide has and is occurring. To commemorate Holocaust Remembrance Day, the city of San Jose is hosting an exhibit in City Hall lobby on a program called Kinder Transport. The exhibit is called Childhood Left at the Station, a tribute to the children of Kinder Transport. It will be in the lobby from today, it was set up this morning, through Friday evening. The exhibit was developed by the Holocaust Museum of Los Angeles in 2018 to commemorate the 80th anniversary of Kinder Transport, which took place from November 1938 to September 1939. Desperate families were looking for ways to protect their young children and willingly separated from them in order to hide them away so they could be evacuated to other countries. Not all countries were willing to allow refugees from Europe to settle in their borders. In fact, the United States had a strong anti-immigrant sentiment at the time, and that meant that very few Jewish refugees were able to settle here. The most recent Ken Burns documentary that just came out last year, The U.S. and the Holocaust, sheds light on how the world often turned their back on those fleeing the Nazis in Europe. The children of Kinder Transport were often the only survivors of their family and had to leave their families at a young age on their own as unaccompanied refugees. The United Kingdom took in nearly 10,000 predominantly Jewish children from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, and were placed in foster homes, hostels, schools, and farms. Many never saw their families again. They suffered the trauma of separation from their parents. There are stories of screaming children at railway stations as children were put on trains, not realizing they may never see their parents again. As a parent, I can't imagine being so desperate that I would have to make the decision to send my children away in order for them to survive. So please take some time this week to view the exhibit in City Hall Tower lobby. The exhibit showcases 10 survivors of Kinder Transport and tells their stories about them leaving their homes and their futures after they left. And also join us on Friday at 11 o'clock. We'll be holding a press event in front of City Hall. We'll hear stories from some survivors of Kinder Transport. With me today, as we recognize Holocaust Remembrance Day, is Jessica Blitchok, who is Associate Director of Jewish Silicon Valley. Their group helps ensure a vibrant Jewish community in Silicon Valley and promote the well-being of all people through leadership, philanthropic support, and programs rooted in Jewish values and tradition. She helped bring this exhibit to us from the Holocaust Museum of Los Angeles. And also with us is a very special guest, Tamar Jacobs, who is a childhood survivor who had to hide in Switzerland during that time. And she'll tell us some of her story before we present her with a proclamation for Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Hello, I'm Tamar Jacobs, and I'm reading the book now, very, very good book, The Choice. I bet you could show it to you later. It is written by Dr. Edith Eger, E-G-E-R. She is a psychologist and is 95 years old and is still working. And in a few weeks I'm going to see her, get to meet her. I am a psychologist and I'm 94 years old. But that's where everything changes. So, I was born in Germany. When I was 3 years old, my father got exiled to Switzerland because he was a freethinker, a Jewish freethinker. He got exiled to Switzerland, where things went too bad at the beginning, but later he got interned in concentration camps. Most people don't know that in Switzerland they had concentration camps. And they didn't torture them, they didn't kill them there. They were closed, had electrified barbed wires around. It was just, they weren't free. He got freed very late, much after the war. In the meantime, I grew up in Germany. I was in Cologne, and there was a little neighbor boy, Hänschen. Hänschen is like Johnny. John boy. Little Hänschen was half my age, tortured me. He abused me. He called me bad names. He cursed me. He called me dreckige Jid, which is dirty Jew. He threw rocks at me and hit me with sticks. I was deadly afraid of that little kid, even though he was half my age. But his parents were in charge. They were the SS, they were the Nazis. And I asked my mother, could she help me? No, she couldn't, because they were powerful. They were the powerful Nazis. She couldn't tell that little 3-year-old boy to stop throwing rocks at me. I was really afraid by this bullying little boy. And even though effectively he couldn't really hurt me a lot, I mean, he hit me with rocks, but that's not torture like in a gas chair, like in camps. So the daily abuse luckily didn't last very long, just a few months, which was too much for me, because then I left Germany and went to Switzerland. But even though it didn't last that long, and it wasn't really bad compared to what happened in the camps, the tortures, it was not that bad. For me, it was very bad. I was traumatized. I became timid and unassertive. I started disliking boys. I became ashamed of myself. How did I allow myself to be tortured, traumatized by a kid half my age? Of course, it wasn't him alone. It was the people who were behind him, the Nazis, his parents, the whole Nazi party. And I mean, the fact that this affected me like this, it sounds unreasonable, but really when something happens to a person at that age, at an impressionable age, that's what happens. It makes us lose our self-esteem, our dignity, and it affects us even though the trauma was not enormous as compared to others. But it affected me. As I said, that's where the similarities between Dr. Edith Eger and me ended, just by our age now of profession. She was from Hungary. She was sent to Auschwitz at age 16. Then she went to a few other camps. She was in a death march at several death camps. She was starved. She was exhausted. She was freezing. All the things that we know that happened in the camp. She was humiliated. And at the end of the camp, at the end of the war, they found her barely alive in a pile of corpses. She was lying among corpses, and they thought she was dead too, but then a soldier found that she was had still a little bit of life still in her. She struggled for decades with flashbacks and survivor's guilt, and she wouldn't talk about it. She wanted to hide the whole thing. She never mentioned it. She pretended it didn't exist. All her torture. She just didn't want to talk about it. Until she met Dr. Viktor Frankl. Many of you know who he is, who he was. The famous psychiatrist, writer, doctor, philosopher. He changed her completely. He told her that he gave her permission not to hide anymore. He helped her find words for her happenings, for her experiences. He helped her with the painful torture. He helped her talk about it, cope with the pain. Cope by talking, by thinking about it, not by evading it, not by hiding from it. And he also taught her to accept and love herself for who she is. A human being, imperfect but whole. Dr. Frankl asked, what is the meaning to all our torture, to all our suffering? There must be a meaning. What can we learn from it? And she learned that those painful experiences don't have to be liabilities. They can be gifts. You can look at them as gifts in a certain way. If you have years of philosophy and psychology and treatment. He taught her all of those things, and it helped him survive. He was also a survivor of camps, of many camps, for years. And that helped him survive, and he taught her these things. He wrote many books, the most famous of them being Man's Search for Meaning. I recommend it to read for most of you, all of you. They did a survey a few years ago among the most important books in America. And this book was one of the 5 most important ones, Man's Search for Meaning. So, through his mentorship and friendship, she learned how to survive. She discovered a purpose in her suffering and a sense of meaning that helped her not only with her past, but also to emerge from her trials with something precious, worth sharing, a path to freedom. She used her knowledge and her suffering, and when she got out of the suffering, she sees patients, clients who had terrible traumas, and the United States government asks her from time to time to speak to soldiers who come back from some very traumatized in Vietnam and so on. She talks to soldiers, to officers, and helps them overcome their traumas. Freedom is accepting what is. Also, forgiving ourselves. She learned many things from him, but it took her 35 years to heal from all her traumas. 35 years. That's how bad it was. Now, everything can be taken away from a person but one thing. The last of the human freedoms. To choose one's attitude in any given time, in any given set of human freedom, human circumstances. To choose one's own way. That is the freedom. To be able to choose one's way. Even if you take everything away from you, you can still decide how to respond. We can't choose to vanish the dark, but we can choose to kindle the light. Choice is everything, and choice is always there. Each moment is a choice. No matter how frustrating things are for us, how horrible, how boring, how tormenting, you can always choose how to respond. You can always choose how to respond. That is freedom. We don't know where we're going, and we don't know what's going to happen, but nobody can take away what we put in our minds. That's ours. Nobody can take that away. You can't change what happened. You can't change what happened to you. You can't change what you did. You can't change what you did. You can't change what was done to you. But you can always choose how you live now. How you live now, how we live today. We can choose that. And this is what I learned from this book by Dr. Edith Eger. And I recommend the book. And I want you to remember your freedom to choose how to react, to choose how to answer, to choose how to respond.